I have no idea what the story of Dark Souls is, and I'm convinced that the developers don't know either. So, I'm gonna talk about Bloodborne instead.
Oh, yeah. Pale blood. Well, you've come to the right place.
Bloodborne was my introduction into the Soulsborne series, and I've played it a lot. Its setting captivated me immediately, and the game's art style will always be one of my favourites in gaming, if not the media industry in general. The nightmarish creatures, gothic-era towns, and that thick feeling of mystery and dread. Anything you witnessed in this game was just gorgeous, and as I explored these areas, I found myself soaking up tiny bits of lore, helping to mould the overarching narrative. Everything in the game had a place in its world and contributed to the story, but unlike the aesthetic, Bloodborne's storytelling draw came from how much of the story I hadn't witnessed. When I played through the game for the first time, I learned approximately 3 significant things about the narrative. 1. I was a hunter, and it was the night of the hunt, but I didn't know what the hunt was, or what the night of the hunt meant. Secondly, I knew I was tasked with finding the Pale Blood to ascend this plane. But, I mean, at the start of the game, that's just nonsensical to me. And thirdly, the human race was being overseen by these huge creatures called amygdalas. These guys not only looked amazing, but were much higher in the food chain compared to humans, and I still had no idea what role they played in the story. I also fought and killed one, so my assumption was that they were some form of antagonist. The reason I learned next to nothing the first time through the game is because the way Bloodborne's narrative is represented is, well, it isn't. You need to be actively looking for insight into the story to be able to find it, and that parallels the rest of the game perfectly. During gameplay, you have no idea how tough an enemy is, or what a weapon's moveset is going to be, without starting a fight. Likewise, you aren't going to know why in the world all this crazy ass stuff is happening in Yharnam, unless you make an effort to engage with the storytelling mechanics. The narrative is similar to a jigsaw puzzle in this way, except the pieces come in forms of item descriptions, character dialogues, and world and character design, instead of being handed to you in a box. Everything you could ever want to know about Bloodborne's lore is right there in front of you. You just have to find and decrypt it all. Now, I think this is absolutely genius for 3 reasons. Firstly, role-playing. It helps the player see themselves in the character's shoes, which is a great thing, especially in an RPG. Both of you guys started the game knowing absolutely nothing, and the story has to be put together manually through finding clues and connecting dots, usually just acquiring new items for your hunter. But this represents the player character's uselessness too. Throughout the game, you're given tiny bits of information surrounding your venture from important NPCs.
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Though most of the time it just creates more questions than answers, encouraging you to dig around even further. Secondly, exploration and hidden mechanics. The player can find pieces of this enormous puzzle in the strangest of places. Subtle enemy dialogue, items, locations, they all hold vital information. Like finding this girl in some random window in Yharnam somewhere, who gives you a box and says,
"Are you a hunter? I just really look for my mum. Daddy never came back from the hunt, and she went to find him, but now she's gone too. My mum wears a red jeweled brooch. It's so big and beautiful. You won't miss it. Oh, I mustn't forget. If you find my mum, give her this music box."
The music box description says it has the names Viola and Gascoigne on some paper inside it, and you, a true detective in the making, figure out that there's a boss of the same name, and one of the best bosses at that, but that's for another time. So you've got a lead, location, and suspect, it's time to go question the man of the hour, and what do you know, playing the music box makes the guy do... well, you get the picture. However, upon beating Gascoigne, you find a corpse thrown bloodied across a nearby roof. Upon further inspection, you find that she was wearing a bright red brooch. Oh no. That's such a small detail in the game, but it makes such a huge impact. It was hugely rewarding for me when I figured it out, and I felt smarter than I ever did playing Professor Layton.
Frankly, I'm ashamed.
Yeah, sorry, bud. And finally, it means that you definitely missed out on quite a lot of the story. I mean, look at how little I learned on my first playthrough. Bloodborne, by design, encourages experimentation, and one of the best ways it does that is by allowing you to play the game over and over with the same characters. It lets you try out new weapons, strategies, and playstyles, without having to go collect all the items all over again. The replay value in this game is phenomenal, and every time you do start over, guaranteed there's always a piece of dialogue or story that clicks into place when it made no sense to you before. You probably had no idea what the note in Iosefka's clinic meant during your first few playthroughs. But once you figured out how to achieve the childhood's beginning-ending, acquired and consumed pale blood, and ascended humanity to become what is essentially a god, suddenly that note, right at the start of the game, makes a whole lot more sense. And still, it probably raises more questions for the player to figure out. You know what the message means, but who wrote the message if no one in Yharnam knew what pale blood was? And if it was the player character that wrote it, what were his motives prior to visiting Yharnam? And that's really what takes it to the next level for me. The fact that each player only collected part of the game's story, and how one person perceived it was probably entirely different to another's. The game has sparked a huge community of people dedicated to piecing together all these nonsense extracts of text into an understandable tale. The amount of content on YouTube and Reddit alone discussing this is insane, and I'm sure there wouldn't be such a committed group of people if the story wasn't outlandish and just scarily bonkers. That's probably why they're so dedicated to working it all out. Like, seriously. What's with the fact that I can eat umbilical cords as proof to the spirit of the moon that I'm worthy to ascend this plane of existence? Not to mention pupils being scooped out of eyes because people are supposedly hallucinating huge creatures staring down at them, or bird-dog hybrids all mixed and matched. Seriously, who thinks of this stuff? It's horrific, and I can't get enough of it. The narrative's presence, or lack thereof, really benefits the game's pace too. In most cases, the player can progress through the game at their own speed. Though you have to engage challenges to learn about overcoming them, the player can do this at whatever pace they want. Don't feel strong enough to fight a certain boss? That's okay, just chill and grind the areas before. Or, just keep slamming your head against that wall until you eventually break through. The storytelling techniques parallel this. The player has full control over when they want to look into the narrative and how much detail they want to get into. You could play through the entire game and be content with only knowing that you named your character Sherlock, and that the threaded cane is your favourite weapon. Or, you can obsess over every minute detail, learning the ins and outs of every inch of Yharnam, the secrets of the Bergenworth Library, and the establishment of the Healing Church. The choice is completely up to you. So that's why I love the Soulsborne storytelling format. It pretty much is two completely separate games. One is a ruthless RPG, the other, probably the best detective game you can experience. Better yet, their separation means that gameplay is never interrupted by unnecessarily throwing story at the player, and the story becomes a fantastic treasure hunt to solve a huge mystery. Not to mention the fact that it's created some of the most dedicated communities in gaming culture. The people that are into Soulsborne are into Soulsborne. They love that stuff, and for a good reason. It's an experience you really need to witness yourself to truly understand and appreciate, and that rings true in both the gameplay elements and the narrative. Thank you.